Starting us off with number 10 is the truth. Now this one's from a girl on Reddit who said she was named after her great aunt who died in a motorcycle accident a few years before she was born. She was told not to talk about her to her great grandma because the loss was just too much to handle and relive again, which was fair enough. No one wants to relive the death of their daughter. Now when the user was 24 years old, her great grandma passed away, and after the wake her great uncle got drunk and just starts exposing everyone. Now in casual passing he mentioned the great aunt's suicide, and the user was like, wait, what suicide? Grandma told me she had died in a motorcycle accident. And he replied saying, yeah, that was the cover story. She just didn't want to tell anyone the real reason she had to give a closed casket for her daughter's funeral. And at this point the whole truth and nothing but the truth had to be spilled because too much had already been said. Now apparently the great aunt was a lesbian in love with another girl from university, and they had made a plan to be together without their parents' knowledge. Now when the user's great grandmother figured out the plans, she sent the great aunt halfway across the country in order to separate the two. But the girls had a contingency plan if this were to happen, and of course they knew it would. They made a suicide pact. The great grandma's homophobia had caused two innocent girls to kill themselves, but she admitted she never forgave herself for it, and it haunted her till the day she died. The user was honestly shocked at all the lies she'd been told about the woman she was literally named after, and the fact that everyone just accepted this lie just because of the great grandma's shame. This whole story just pissed me off, but then again this whole list is gonna piss me off. Love is love! Love is love. But coming in at number 9 is the boyfriend. This one actually broke my heart and was shared by a Reddit user. Now she said her grandma grew up in Costa Rica in the 40s, and at the time her mother was dating a guy that just seemed off. The user's grandma and her sister hated him, but their mother insisted that he was a good guy and that he took care of them, so they kind of just shut up about it. But one night the guy decides that he's actually done being nice and ends up murdering the mother in her bed by beating her skull with a hammer. Blood is everywhere on the walls, the ceiling, soaking the mattress. Now the user's grandma and sister come home to the scene and their mum dead in bed, and the boyfriend obviously nowhere to be found. They called the police, who took the body away, did a cursory examination of the crime scene, and then left. Can you just get this? The police left these two 12 and 9-year-old girls in a house where their mother had just been murdered. But the even worse part was that they only had one bed in the house, and that was the blood-soaked mattress, and if they threw that away they'd have to sleep on the floor. So they decided to just flip the mattress over, but then the user's grandma just ended up getting drenched in all the blood the mattress had soaked up. At number 8 we have who are the parents. Now this one also comes from a girl on Reddit who said when she was 21 her older sister confessed she had been raped by a stranger when she was 17 years old. The user was shocked that she hadn't been told this before since they came from a really big family and everyone just kind of knew everything. But then she got to thinking her older sister also happened to be 17 years older than her, and people always commented on how the siblings could be twins. And one time for a class the user was asking her mum questions about her birth story, but she just couldn't remember the answers for most of the questions, like who was in the room at the time, when was she born, she just didn't know. To make matters more complicated, the parents were very religious and would never have condoned an abortion, so the secret here is that the user is adamant that she is the product of her sister's rape and that her grandparents have been pretending to be her real parents this whole time. Can you just imagine if your sister was your real mum this whole time? The user actually never had the guts to ask her sister about it, since if it wasn't true then she just made this whole traumatic rape story about herself, which is just very narcissistic. Honestly, if that was me, I would have to ask. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't ask. But then if it wasn't true, I would just disown myself and just leave. Now filling our number 7 slot is the rage. Now this one's from Reddit user SarXNA, who shared that her great grandpa and grandma had 17 children together, which wow, like what a different time it was, but even then, that's a lot of bloody kids. Either way, the user found out that one of the children ended up becoming pregnant during her teens, but it was because her father had raped her. Now when the mother found out, she was so angry and filled with rage, not at her husband for raping their daughter, no, that would be absurd. She was livid at her daughter, who she then pushed down the stairs, and so the daughter and baby both died. That's just shocking. Why would you get mad at your daughter because your husband raped her? Now at number 6 is the uncle. Honestly, I read a lot of stories for this video and I feel like a running theme in all of them was just evil uncles, which is just weird because I feel like uncles are usually just always so fun and nice, but clearly they are not. Now this one's from Reddit user GarbageCat88 who said their great aunt fell into a current at Niagara Falls and then got swept over the falls and ended up dying. Now most people ruled it out as an accidental death, but everyone in their family begged to differ. They believed the great aunt was actually pushed into the water by her alcoholic, abusive husband. Now the user's grandma told them that way back in the day domestic abuse was seen as taboo and shameful, and so the whole thing was just kind of swept under the rug until the husband got remarried. The great uncle was very quickly arrested after his second marriage for nearly beating his wife to death. Dude, what is your issue? Go to rehab, buy a punching bag, and if neither of those things solve your issues, then don't get married. Plain and simple. So this Reddit user said that as their granddad got older, the user and their mum would look after him. Now the grandpa had dementia, but he would share stories from his life, from the war, from his youth, and so forth. Now one day he started telling them about his wife. He had liked her from before he went off to fight during World War II, but never really acted on it since he was poor and didn't think he was worthy to marry her. Now that's why he even enlisted, because he wanted to become respectable, but while he was away, their grandma ended up getting married to someone her parents approved of. But her first husband was horrible. He'd beat her, verbally abuse her, and even make her sleep in the barn outside in the cold. Now the only reason she didn't divorce him is because it just wasn't the done thing at the time. It was looked down upon, as you guys probably know. But when the grandpa finally came back from war, he was told she was married, that he could go visit her, and so he did, you know, just to say hello, old flame, old fling, you know how it is. When he got there, he found her beaten and bloody and broken and took her to a doctor and convinced her to divorce the man and get out of that situation. She did, and then they got married a year later, but the ex-husband would continuously show up and harass her. Now the grandpa had always said the ex ended up moving away, but in a lucid moment recalling the story, he said this: "I hated him for what he'd done to her. I knew he'd never leave her alone. I made sure he'd never bother her or any woman again." So he basically just confessed to killing this man in the 40s in the Midwest, and not just that, he got away with it too. At number 4 is the video game break. Now you know when you've just been playing a PlayStation game for like 3 hours straight and you're just not getting anywhere and you're like, you know what, okay, I can quickly pause this, get a drink, get a snack right about now, you know how it is. Now that's an expected video game break, whereas this one is the farthest thing from it. Now this one came from an anonymous person who said their grandma was watching them play video games when all of a sudden she made a startling confession. She shared that when she was super young, she snuck out of their house late at night, and a man who lived on her street ended up taking her to his basement and raping her. She ended up getting pregnant, and after she gave birth, her mum and doctor took the baby away and smothered it to death. And she didn't even have a choice in the matter. The person had no idea what to say to this unprovoked confession, so they just hugged her and apologized on many people's behalf, but their grandma had closed off again by then and just said she didn't want to talk about it anymore, she just had to get it off her chest. There's so many stories of this that I read and I'm just like, my heart goes out to all these people that such horrible things happen to you guys. Now filling our number 3 slot is the disappearing act. This one kind of made me laugh a bit, like I know it's not funny, but this aunt is just on another level of that I just want to attain at one point in my life. So an anonymous person shared that they have an aunt that literally disappeared off the face of the earth. It was the 40s or 50s in Portland and she was about 20 something at the time. But nothing was wrong, she didn't have a problematic life, she was happy, she had a job, didn't have any family problems, but one day she just never came back from work. But also I just want to add that just because nothing seems wrong with her or her life on the outside doesn't mean she was happy on the inside. I mean, you never really know what people are going through truly, so just want to throw that out there. Anyway, her family had no clue what happened or where she went, and they assumed she got kidnapped or was killed or just died somewhere. That was literally in the story, that she just died somewhere. How casual is that? Anyway, 5 years later, the aunt's brother is in Chicago for a business trip, and while walking down a street, he sees his sister. He calls out her name to make sure it's her, and she turns around and he's like, what the hell? Before bombarding her with a bunch of questions, which she obviously dodges. To clear the air, she invites him to her apartment, promising to explain everything. They reach the apartment, and before they get started, she says she really needs to buy some cigarettes from across the street because this was all a massive shock for her as well. He lets her go, and then again, she never bloody comes back. Like, what? Like, don't let her go anywhere alone if she has a history of pulling this crap, dude. Like, you had one job to not let her out of your sight, and that's exactly what you did. Chaperone her to the cigarette shop. You don't let her go alone. No. Now at number 2 is the drugs. This just pissed me off so much I can't even tell you. Now this Reddit user shared that he found out that his dad used to drug his mum for years while they were married and then proceeded to rape her when she passed out. Now as soon as the user found that out, he helped his mum divorce him, and now the family has no relationship with the dad whatsoever. But it gets worse. While the user was dating his now wife, she once had some drinks with his dad and just was not waking up. Now she had just turned 21 at the time, so the user just assumed she couldn't handle her alcohol, but after years of knowing her, he realized she can handle her drink very well and she's never been unwakeable. So the user is damn sure his dad drugged his wife and maybe raped her, but he has no proof. This whole story just made me absolutely sick to my stomach. Finally, at number 1 is the secret family. This one blew my mind, but it's actually not as uncommon as you'd think. So this story was shared by an anonymous girl who has 2 brothers and parents who have been married for over 35 years. Now remember that detail. Now one year over Christmas, she was doing some family research and found that her dad's name brought up birth results for 2 other people other than her and her siblings. Now the births were registered to the north of England, which was a red flag straight away because her dad used to work in that area for 5 years 20 years prior. So keep in mind their parents were married by that point. He would go up there for 2 weeks, then be home for 2 weeks, and so forth. Now the girls did some more digging and found the 2 kids on Facebook, and they were now grown women, and their last names were also her dad's last name. Instead of contacting them, since she assumed they didn't know either, she found and contacted their mum. She posed as her dad's relative, and the woman confirmed her dad was the father of her kids and even sent photocopies of their birth certificates. Now the girl ends up calling the woman and confessing she's his daughter as well and had no idea about any of this, and the woman obviously breaks down crying. She shared that they had met in a pub and her dad had told her that he was single, and a few months later they were expecting their first child, and a year later the second. She thought he went back to Wales every 2 weeks for work, but he would call every other day from a phone box because apparently he didn't own a landline. Already shady, so many red flags. Who doesn't own a landline? Come on now. And one day he went back to Wales for work and just straight up never came back. The woman tried to contact the company he worked for, but his contract was up, so he didn't work there anymore. And since he had lied about where he lived in Wales, the woman couldn't find him either. So the girl's dad just left this woman with 2 kids and literally did the biggest case boy ghosting I've ever seen. Like, I thought I got ghosted bad, like this is horrible. The girl didn't even have the heart to confront her dad or tell her mum about the other 2 kids. Oh my god, I don't even know what I would do if I found that out. First of all, I would tell everyone. Would I? That's a secret that would ruin a family for sure. Oh, but the truth has to come out, you guys!
Starting off this dark list, and at number 10 we have the secret farmhouse. A 25-year-old man escaped from a farmhouse and ran to the nearest public place, which happened to be a bar. He guzzled down 5 beers, and then he asked the bartender for help. He told him that he hasn't been outside for 9 years, and he's not the only one. Dutch police were called to the scene, where they found a secret staircase behind a cupboard that led them down to the basement. Inside this secret room, they found a man and his 6 children living inside of a small confined space. Some of these kids had no idea that the other people existed. They thought that they were the only ones left on Earth, and they were waiting for the world to end. But as it turns out, someone in their family was keeping them locked up in this secret farmhouse for 9 years. Is this real life right now? The police were unable to find their mother, and they suspect that she was either the one that did this or that she is dead somewhere. An unknown uncle in prison is at number 9. This scary family secret comes from Reddit. Apparently this person had an uncle in prison, but no one in her family ever told her what he was serving time for. The family never talked about him, and if he was brought up in conversation, everyone would just simply change the topic. But one night, she was watching a TV documentary about horrific crimes that happened in Perth, Australia. And guess what? One of them was about David and Catherine Burney and how they brutally murdered a call girl. Well, as it turns out, this guy had the exact same name as her uncle in prison. Could this be the same guy? Could this be your uncle? Well, she turned to her mom, who said, "So I guess you could put the 2 to 2 together." Well, I guess that's one way to find out that you have an uncle who murdered someone. Not the best way of finding out, but yeah. The murderous couple is in at number 8. Gerald and Alice Uden appear to be the most wholesome couple. They regularly attended church, and they seem to be super nice, genuine. They're very generous people. Well, don't be fooled by them, because both of them were hiding their own deep, dark secret for decades. Apparently they were both married to other people they met before. Alice shot her husband in the head and then decided to hide his body in a gold mine. Whereas Gerald confessed to shooting his ex-wife and stepchildren with a rifle that she had bought him as a present. I mean, is this real life right now? What are the odds of these two people finding each other? Did they meet at a Killed My Spouse group meeting, or maybe they swiped right on the Kill Me app or I've Killed Before app? It's also crazy how many years went by before they were finally caught by the police. This story is absolutely insane. Next up on our list at number 7, antifreeze. A mother and daughter confessed to poisoning members of their family with antifreeze. Let me give you guys a quick backstory. The father died without warning, so they attributed it to natural causes. Well, 5 months later, her autistic son died from what seemed to be seizure-related complications. And then the following year after that, her daughter needed emergency medical attention, and this is for an organ failure. Yeah, something about this just doesn't seem right. The family's pastor thought so too, so he reached out to local law enforcement who were able to get a confession out of her. And her motives were pretty messed up. She wanted her husband gone because of his temper, she couldn't deal with her autistic son, and her daughter racked up too much debt from college. So she had to go as well. She was gonna keep her other 2 daughters because she so loved them. But get this, the police found a diary belonging to her youngest daughter, and she wrote about how she helped her mother plan and execute the murders, and her goal was to eliminate the entire family until it was just her and her mother left. I mean, I can't even deal with this messed up family, so let's move on. The closet child comes in at number 6. For 3 years, a young boy was hidden inside of a locked closet while he was sedated by sleeping pills given to him by his mother. When neighbors asked Veronica Aguilar where her son was, she told them that he was placed in an institution in Mexico. But her 3 other children who slept on a bed just outside of the closet door knew the truth, but they were forbidden by their mother from saying anything to anyone. Sadly, this little boy's life came to an end when police finally discovered his malnourished body inside of the closet. It's insane because so many people like teachers, social workers, therapists, they all knew that he was a victim of abuse, but somehow they lost track of him, and because of their carelessness, his mother was able to lock him inside of a closet for a very long time until he ultimately passed away. Number 5, we have a crazy story about a girl who was raised by a man who killed her parents. Victoria Montenegro thought that her adoptive parents were kind and generous people who took her in after her real parents were killed in a shootout in Buenos Aires in 1976. Well, as it turns out, that was a complete lie. When she turned 24 years old, she discovered that the couple who raised her was part of the military regime responsible for her parents' disappearance. Her birth parents were actually abducted, abused, and assassinated by this group when she was only 4 months old. So her adoptive father took this opportunity to falsify her documents, hide her identity, and raise her as his own. This is just so messed up, so twisted. All of these years, she was being raised by a family that actually killed her parents and stole her identity. A serial killer in hiding brings us to number 4. Back in 1971, 13-year-old Charlie Brandt went into a full homicidal rampage. Without any warning, he shot his father in the back and then shot his pregnant mother while she was in the bath. He went to kill his other sister, but luckily his gun jammed. His father barely survived the shooting, but his mother wasn't so lucky. But because of his age, prosecutors never charged him with his mother's death. He was able to walk free and live a normal life. His family never brought up that night ever again, and he just went on as nothing ever happened. Well, in 2004, Brandt went on to brutally stab his wife 7 times in the chest, and he even decapitated her and ripped her heart out. Afterwards, he committed suicide. It's crazy because no one knew that he had serial killer tendencies except for his family, who kept his secret after all of these years. Now at number 3, dead bodies in the garage. Darren West spent 10 years of his life thinking that he only had 3 children with his ex-wife. But in 2006, this reality was shattered. He was serving time in prison for drug charges, but he was being released. While he was making arrangements to stay with his ex-wife, he came to the shocking truth. He found a dead baby in her garage, and it wasn't the only one. Between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman had secretly given birth to 7 babies, and she choked them all to death. she turned her garage into a makeshift graveyard and kept this family's secret for years. As it turns out, she was addicted to meth, and that was her motive for killing these poor kids. I just can't believe that she was able to hide her pregnancy and murders this whole time. She probably would have taken this dark secret to her grave. The Turpin children makes its way onto this list at number 2. David and Louise Turpin managed to abuse their 13 children for years until one daughter was able to escape and tell the police. These poor kids were in such a controlling and abusive environment and had to do whatever it took to survive. In the media, their house was being called a house of horrors because some of the children were so far removed from the world. I mean, they didn't even know what medicine or the police were until they were finally rescued. They were only fed once a day and given a shower once a year. No one in the neighborhood had any idea what was going on inside of that house, and the parents managed to get away with this for a very long time. They're able to get away with their dark secret for many, many years. Now at number 1, we have a girl who was held captive for 24 years. This next story is a pretty famous case that emerged back in 2008. A woman named Elizabeth Fritzl, well, she told police that she had been captive for the past 24 years by her own father. Joseph Fritzl had assaulted, abused, and hurt her numerous times during her, imprisonment inside of her family basement. His abuse resulted in the birth of 7 children, where 3 of them remained in captivity with Elizabeth. One of them died shortly after birth, and Joseph disposed of his body in an incinerator, and the other 3 were brought up by him and his wife as their own. This secret went on for 24 years until finally the police discovered what was really going on. This story is so much more messed up, but I definitely don't want to get into all the horrific details. All I know is that Elizabeth is finally free, and I hope that one day she'll be able to move past this. I feel so bad.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Grand Dragon. This one comes from Betamax V2, who said, "A great uncle of mine passed away when I was a little boy. The family met at his house after the funeral to start packing things up and all, as he had no children and his wife died many years before him. My great uncle was a highly respected member of his small town. He was a banker of some sort, deacon in the church, and all those things that made him a good person. Well, tucked away in the attic, not covered by any dust mind you, was a large wooden trunk. Inside this trunk were the purple robes of a KKK Grand Dragon, various member listings, meeting notes, and all other sorts of things related to the KKK. Turns out that my great uncle was a very active, although very much secretive, member of the regional chapter of the KKK. Okay, I think we've already started up here with this video. Can you guys even imagine finding out that your relative, someone who was respected and loved by his family and friends, was a member of the KKK? Probably the most famous white supremacy group of all time. I guess you'd have a lot of questions after that, especially for your family. Like, how didn't they know? Moving on to number 9 now, we have The Milk. This one comes from Kleinboy, 1987. Now he said, "My great grandfather hit his wife with a fire poker and slit her throat. He then proceeded to blow his head apart with a shotgun. He sat down in a rocking chair and used his cane to push the trigger, all over an argument of whether it was too cold for me to walk to the grocery store to get some milk." That's it. That's the whole story. That's everything. There's nothing more to help us try and wrap our heads around what happened here. The couple were arguing over whether this storyteller would be alright getting milk due to the cold, and he murdered her over it and then killed himself. Now I'm guessing by the fact that they're referred to as great grandparents that they were pretty old when this happened. What would cause someone who's been in a marriage for decades and decades to just suddenly snap like that? I think there's more to this story, but honestly, I'm not even sure I want to know. At the number 8 spot now, we have Dog Heaven. This story comes from New Orpheus about his wife. He said, "My wife and I were reminiscing about our childhood pets one day. When I shared how hard it was when my cherished dog had to be put down, she got to thinking all of her childhood dogs were killed by semis. Now normally the thought of a dog getting loose and being run over by a semi truck isn't that far-fetched. However, it had just clicked with her that her childhood home was in the countryside, down a long gravel road. The nearest highway was really far away. She decided that the next time she talked to her dad, she would find out what really happened. After all, now she is an adult and can handle the truth that a 7-year-old couldn't. Well, her dad just sort of smiled at her and said, "Oh honey, I never lied to you. Your childhood dogs were indeed hit by a semi-automatic. Yeah, a semi-automatic rifle." Now, to be fair here, it sounds like her dad was putting down the dogs when they were old or very sick instead of taking them to the vet to do it. I hear that's more common in certain rural communities around the world. I'm passing no judgment here. I just thought it would be a shocking story because she genuinely thought they were all getting hit by semis, as in semi-trucks, when it was actually semi-automatic rifles. It's quite a big difference between those two things. Next up at number 7 now, guys, we have the judge. This one comes from Thing, who said, the real reason my aunt moved back to my hometown was she was briefly kidnapped by some bad guys she displeased in her work as a judge. The guy held her at gunpoint and told her she could either leave town in the next 24 hours or be taken back in. I was like 8 at the time, so everyone just told me she moved back because she missed us all. I found out about it when my brother and I were rehashing old stuff 10 years later. Now I'm sure all the adults in this family had mixed feelings about the auntie returning. Yay, auntie's back in town for good because she misses us, but oh no, it's actually because she was told to leave at gunpoint where she worked as a judge. That's really scary. It's also kind of scary to think that some criminals can subvert justice like that. Maybe you guys think this is exceptionally rare though. I hope it is. Moving on to number 6 now, guys, we have the other child. This one comes from Egg Coroner, who said, I just found out that my grandparents wanted more kids but were having trouble getting pregnant for a second time. They adopted a toddler-aged brother and sister when my mother was 7. Soon after, my grandmother got pregnant. The girl then died from a very mysterious fall down the stairs and the boy was quietly given to another family. They never ever spoke of either child from that day forward. I thought she was pulling my leg, but a quick search turned up the girl's death record. I was never close to that grandmother and can't help but think back to every weird aspect of that woman and all the strange relationships she had with her family. Wow. That one is really crazy. I think what the storyteller is trying to suggest is that when the couple finally did get pregnant, they then didn't want their adopted children anymore, and so they staged a fatal accident for the girl and just sent the boy away forever. That is really dark. I presume that it was their mother who told them this story and they thought, there's no way that's true, you must be pulling my leg. But yeah, I don't know, man, I've never heard a good joke that sounds anything like this. Coming in number 5 now, we have the photos. Conte Vincero said, we found a picture of 2 great aunts arm in arm with Hitler. We also found a signed photograph of Mussolini. Yeah, their great aunts were apparently best mates with Hitler. What an awful surprise to find out. I mean, the scary thing about this story is pretty clear. I guess the only positive to take away from it is that maybe their grandmother wasn't all chummy with Hitler. Maybe it was just 2 sisters. Clutching at straws here, I think. As for the signed picture of Mussolini, I think they should sell it and give the money to a nice charity. That's something that would have really annoyed him. At the number 4 spot now, we have life insurance. This one comes from Cotton Weasel, who said, I have a second cousin that murdered his siblings and parents for insurance money. He didn't get away with it, but only spent around 20 years in prison. He's out now, but no one talks about him or will speak to him. The only reason I even know is my parents warn me if he ever reaches out to me that I shouldn't talk to him. I managed to find out about him and what happened by Googling him. Unreal. I mean, for me personally, unless something awful has happened, there should never be a good reason to kill your parents and siblings. I actually can't think of any reason off the top of my head. That's pretty obvious for normal people, but to do it because of life insurance money, that's insane. I'm glad to hear that he got locked up, but yeah, I do think 20 years might not be enough for slaughtering a whole family in cold blood. Someone in the comments section of this story replied by saying, if he does contact you, the first thing you tell them is, I don't have any life insurance. That's some good but also quite dark humorous advice there. Moving on to the number 3 spot now, guys, we have the uncle. This one comes from Dogma 3721, who said, an uncle I've never met, my mom's brother, killed my mom's parents when he was 16 in a fit of rage and burnt down their home in an attempt to cover it up. I've never met him as he has been in jail on a life sentence since before I was born. I was only informed of his existence because my dad was blackmailing my mom with this. I mean, aside from it being scary, this story's just tragic. It's tragic enough to know that your grandparents were murdered and you never got to meet them, especially when you find out that it was your own uncle who did it. I bet it's even more horrifying for the storyteller's mum, especially now that the dad is apparently blackmailing her with this. I mean, that's a pretty scummy thing to do, as if she hasn't already been through enough in her life. Sorry, this is supposed to be a scary video, and now I'm just angrily ranting about things. At the number 2 spot now, we have the past life. This is just strange on every level. See if you can follow along with it. Someone on Reddit said, in 1976, my father was in the military and traveled to Guatemala after an earthquake. During the cleanup, he was at the Mayan site of Mixco Viejo. There were several burial sites overturned there. For some reason, unknown to me, he brought back the remains of a female Mayan Indian. He claimed to have loved her in a past life. These remains are still in the box in our attic. They are mostly dust now, with a part of the skull left. My father died in 1986, so I cannot ask him about it. My mother and sisters claimed her ghost followed them wherever they moved until my dad died. I am skeptical of that claim. I also have a half-brother in Puerto Rico who is in his 30s that I will never meet. I only know his name is Ricky, and my dad had a fling with a Puerto Rican woman while stationed there in the army sometime in the 70s. Okay, breathe. There's a lot to break down there. I think taking the remains of a stranger from their homeland is very strange, as it is probably illegal too, but his family didn't even do anything when he came back with that. I know they said they didn't know, but now they do, and the remains are apparently still just sitting there in the attic. Weird. As for the last bit of the story, someone else pointed out that pop star Ricky Martin was born in Puerto Rico in the 1970s. Could it be him? And finally, number 1 now, we have Chucky. Disclaimer for this one, guys, this is pretty disturbing. Beastie J said, my mother told me a story about being at a small funeral in the late 1950s in East Texas. The deceased was mentally challenged and the family was relieved to have the child at peace. During the service, the coffin began to rock and crying was heard. Then she was taken outside and watched as the coffin was carried to the cemetery next to the church and hurriedly buried. I was telling my kids this story years later, and my mother walked into the room, listened for a moment, and asked, are you telling them about Uncle Chucky? Okay, I honestly didn't even know whether or not to include this. I was back and forth for about 10 minutes. It's horrifying. I'm really hoping this story isn't actually real. I'm hoping it's very exaggerated, or maybe their mother was just messing around with them. This is really shocking stuff. Did this family really bury their mentally challenged son alive? Personally, I don't think so. I think even with the different attitudes of the 1950s, this is still the stuff of horror and fiction rather than real life and fact. I mean, it's my job to just present people's stories as they are told, but yeah, I want to hear if you guys think this one is legit.
Starting off this countdown, we have the criminal. In 2006, eldest daughter of Prince Andrew dated a criminal. Yeah, she dated a man that was arrested for manslaughter after killing a man named Jonathan Duchateller. He literally beat him to death. Of course, they tried to hide this because it looked so bad on them if a princess had a relationship with a literal killer. But what's crazy is how when news got out, they released a statement saying they must trust her and trust her judgment. Dude, where's the respect and trust for Meghan and Harry? Like, the injustice is so sickening. Coming in at number 9, we have the link to Jeffrey Epstein. And if you guys are liking this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up because it really helps us out and I appreciate it, so go ahead. Back in 2011, it was revealed that Prince Andrew was good friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who was arrested for trafficking and conspiracy to engage in it. I'm sure you all know the disturbing things that Jeffrey did. Well, in fact, he had a lot of connections to high-power individuals, including Prince Andrew. It's thought that Prince Andrew would engage in some of those illegal and disturbing activities through Jeffrey. In September of 2019, one of Prince Andrew's victims, Virginia Robert Giuffre, came forward and revealed what Prince Andrew had done to her when she was only 17.
Virginia says she was 17 when this photo was taken with the prince in Maxwell's London townhome.
But of course, Prince Andrew has denied all claims. And in an attempt to cover all this up, the royal family forced him to step back from his royal duties. They also made a bunch of statements saying that it was a mistake and that he cut all ties with him. I mean, now he's dead, so yeah, but anyway. Moving on to number 8, we have the racism. In Meghan Markle's interview with Oprah, she revealed how racist the royal family is. She felt like she was never accepted because of her skin color since she is biracial. In fact, she said in an interview that there were concerns and conversations about how dark her son's skin might be when he was born. Yeah, they were actually concerned that her son wouldn't look light enough. That is absolutely repulsive. They literally shunned Meghan and her son because of their skin color. Not only that, but there were discussions if her son would even have enough protection. Again, probably having to do with his race. And at number 7, we have the death of Princess Diana. This has to be one of the most controversial deaths of all time. I mean, there are a number of conspiracy theories surrounding her death, but honestly, it seems like the British royal family might be behind her death. In fact, Princess Diana herself feared for her safety. She thought she was going to be killed. This was revealed in a letter that she wrote to her butler. In the letter she said, and I quote, "I am sitting here at my desk today in October, longing for someone to hug me and encourage me to keep strong and hold my head high. This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous, ... is planning an accident in my car. Brake failure and serious head injury in order to make the path clear for Charles to marry." Yeah, Diana literally thought she was going to die in a car accident, and would you look at that. In fact, she expressed concerns to her bodyguards about troubles that she was having with her car. Her bodyguard later died in an accident, which the royals might be behind too. Basically, a conspiracy theory goes that the royals didn't approve of her new lover. In fact, she might have been pregnant with his child. And that's another reason why the royals wanted her dead. So theory goes that the royals either sabotaged the seatbelts in her car, or orchestrated the car crash, or both. In our 6th spot, we have the relation to the German soldiers. You know, that particular group of really bad soldiers in around 1933, run by a certain dictator. I gotta tiptoe around this because of YouTube. But turns out that a British royal family member had a close friendship with... Yeah, that's right. So Queen Elizabeth II's uncle and his wife were sympathizers for these soldiers. They had close ties to the man behind the horror himself. In fact, rumor has it that his wife was giving over information to the Germans. The British government did everything they could to keep this connection and friendship hidden, but in 1957, it all came to light. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the sham. So it turns out that the royal family may not be royal at all. That's right. Let me explain. So King Richard III was King of England until 1485. He died during battle. Well, anyways, for the longest time, Richard III's remains were thought to be lost. That was until 2012 when his remains were discovered. Scientists tested the DNA and concluded that it did belong to him, but the tests didn't link him to any paternal relatives. Meaning, he didn't really come from a chain of royals. So somewhere along the line, infidelity occurred. Now people are rethinking and reanalyzing the royal family tree, and in the end, they may not actually be royal. Somebody come after Queen Elizabeth. Someone do it. Or whatever, Queen Elizabeth II. Come after her. Oh lady. Coming in at number 4, we have the incest. This is actually quite common in royal families, as they want to keep the royalness within the family. But turns out that Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip are distant cousins. Yeah, they share the same bloodline and are both directly related to Queen Victoria. But it doesn't stop there. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were actually first cousins. They ended up having 9 children together. Yikes. There's even some people that believe that Queen Elizabeth's parents were brother and sister, yet that hasn't been proven. But there's just too much inbreeding going on. In our 3rd spot, we have the hidden son. Guess what? George V and Queen Mary had a 6th son, Prince John. Prince John would have been Queen Elizabeth's second uncle, but John suffered from epileptic seizures. Because of this, they thought it showed signs of weakness, so they hid him from the public. Imagine that, being shunned by your family just because you had something you couldn't control. He then was forced to live the last 4 years of his life away in hiding. Like, that's no way to live a life at all. Later, he passed away at his secret cottage after a tragic seizure. In our 2nd spot, we have sexuality and drug use. Prince George, the Duke of Kent, had a lot of things going on, and the royal family was ashamed of him. Apparently he had a long list of lovers, both men and women. And you can only imagine what his family thought about that. Not only that, but he also would abuse a number of substances. There was a lot of gossip going on about him. But in 1942, George tragically passed in a plane crash. Theory goes that the royals were behind this. They planned his death because of his bisexuality and drug use. Crazy. And in our number 1 spot, we have the hidden cousins. If you have watched The Crown, then you probably have already heard this shocker of a story. But 2 of the Queen's first cousins were actually abandoned because they both had disabilities. The cousins' names were Catherine and Nerissa Bowes-Lyon. They both were born with severe learning disabilities. As a result, the royals were ashamed of them. They thought that this would taint the family or degrade their royal status. So they sent them to a mental health institution, which wasn't even the best. They were very mistreated there. They then went on to declare them legally dead, even though they were still alive. They kept them a huge secret. Now, when Nerissa passed away, she was buried in a grave marked only with a name tag and a serial number. That is extremely sad. They didn't even give her a proper burial.
Starting us off with number 10 is the deceit. Well, to be fair, all of these are deceitful in one way or another since they're secrets. So this one was shared by an anonymous person who said when he was 16 years old, he thought he had the perfect family life. Despite having a bunch of step and half siblings, he had a great time. But one day he came home to find his dad waiting outside with all his stuff in the car. When the person got out of the car, their dad was just like, "Hey, I cheated on your mother, I have to leave. See you later, son." Can you imagine? See you later, son? Like, how nonchalant. The boy went inside to find all of his dad's stuff gone. He looked through his drawers to find joints and weed pipes despite raising the kids Pentecostal as hell. He found drug baggies, he found alcohol, he found a loaded shotgun, and this all shocked his system because he basically worshipped his dad growing up. Ever since he was 4 years old, his dad would always tell him that he was the only reason he was still here, and the boy assumed if he was a good boy, his dad would never leave. Turns out the dad didn't leave because he cheated. I mean, he did cheat, but the mum had forgiven him for that. He had actually been molesting the boy's sister since she was 10 years old, and she only came out about it when she was 18, and then he chose to leave. The mum didn't even leave him. The boy felt like for wanting this monster to stick around so bad all these years and not knowing what was happening behind the scenes. Coming in at number 9 is Uncle Jeff. Jeff, spelt with a G-E-O. Now this story comes from Redditor Garbage Axe, and before I get into it, I just want to say that any Jeff that's spelt with G-E-O instead of J is just problematic, and I also want to say Joff. The one in the story is screwed up, and I got a body composition assessment done at my gym by a G-E-O Jeff, and he said I had to lose 12 pounds, and I've been sad ever since. So we hate Joffs. Joffs. Damn you, Joff. Anyway, the user shared that this uncle was another level screwed up. He was the town's police chief, so he could kind of get away with everything and anything. So with that being said, he got super high one day and then killed his best friend. I don't know why or how, but his only punishment was a slap on the wrist. And that's not all. Good old Uncle Jeff also used to sell, or rather pimp out his daughters to men for drug money. Thankfully, his wife divorced him and took the girls, but then both of them got pregnant by their stepdad, who is also a preacher. Like, the story just doesn't end well for anyone. No one is having a happy ending. At number 8 we have Nazis. Yup, this is a thing. This is a thing. So this one was shared by an anonymous person who said the family of the woman he married was just a bit off. Now, she always said she didn't know where her ancestors came from, she didn't know where her last name came from, her parents had blue eyes and platinum blonde hair but had Latino accents. It just didn't make sense. Turns out their first language is Portuguese and they were from Brazil, or so he thought. A year later, she broke down and told him her grandparents were actually hardcore Nazis that left just before the war ended. The guy didn't care and said he still loved her and she was glad he took it well. She then insisted he meet her family in Brazil, and so they planned a trip. When they first got to the colony, it was already just weird as hell. Everyone spoke Portuguese as expected, but they also spoke German. The grandparents themselves weren't really different from the locals except obviously for how they looked, but the colony was very isolated. The people there had a hatred towards anyone who was different to them, i.e. Jews. The wife's great uncle had a Hitler mustache as well, for God's sake. Like, this is just not a good vibe. The last thing the grandparents said to the man was that he needed to understand what they were planning, and the fact that the colony wasn't a retirement home for the Nazi lifestyle, it was a catalyst and incubator. Are they planning a Nazi comeback? Like, that's not gonna happen. Sorry, not sorry. Sorry to crush your dreams. Filling our number 7 slot is the email, another one shared by an anonymous person who said they have a sister and a half brother who's 14 years older than them, and the brother basically has the same mum, different fathers. Now, a few months ago, the person's aunt, as in the mum's sister, sent a giant email to the whole family, venting 60 years of hatred towards the mum in it. She ended it with revealing the person's mum had had another kid that no one knew about because she had given it up for adoption. And obviously no one in the family knew about this. The person ended up confronting their mum about it, who said the father of this kid was his half-brother's dad. They weren't married when she got pregnant, so she gave the baby up, but then eventually they did end up getting married and having the person's half-brother. Obviously they got divorced some years later, the mum ended up marrying the person's dad. Either way, the worst part of this revelation was that after the aunt sent the email, she had actually doused herself in gasoline, tied herself to a pole in her garden, and lit herself on fire. Now at number 6 is the Justice. This man shared that after his first combat tour, he got super drunk with his dad, who was also a combat vet during the Vietnam War. They were in a very deep discussion about killing someone and the feelings that overcome you when you've done it, and then he kinda slipped up and revealed a shocking piece of information. He revealed that the boy's mom had been sexually assaulted after they got married and carried the child to full term, not knowing that that child was his older sister the whole time, as in the person's older sister. But the dad was not gonna take that lightly. He had just been discharged but was still in the Camp Pendleton area, so he gathered a group of guys from his unit and kidnapped the rapist. He took him out in the middle of nowhere, sexually assaulted him, killed him, and then threw him into a ravine. Coming in at number 5 is a story from the past, and I feel like this won't hit that hard because it happened so long ago, like back in 1904, but I still thought it was pretty crazy. Shared by Redditor Kimchi Gimchi, they said that their great-great-great-grandparents immigrated from Prussia to the US. On the way there, one of their 5 sons came down with tuberculosis, and they were so scared that that would jeopardize their chances of getting the whole family into the States that they straight up threw him overboard. They assumed he wouldn't survive the whole journey anyway, so they literally just killed him. I can't even imagine that even being an option for someone, especially a mum. Like, our son has TB, should we just off him? Like, what? I don't even know how they went through with it, I really don't. At number 4 is the stolen child, question mark. Now this one's from Reddit user Fudget Bucket, who shared their mum is not their real mum. Apparently their real mother died from a drug overdose when they were 6 weeks old. The baby was only found when a random man came round to the house to collect money from the mum, and he ended up just taking the baby. His girlfriend was furious at him for just taking the child, but after a bunch of undisclosed time where I don't know what happened, somehow the user's mum ended up with them. Apparently the mum went home to Arizona after a year claiming she got pregnant traveling and didn't know who the dad was. And at first I didn't really think this was such a big story, but then the Redditors commenting on the post started speculating that the user could easily be a missing kid or a stolen child, and I was like, wow, that adds a whole nother layer to this that I did not even think about, but also very messed up. Filling at number 3 slot are sides. Now this one comes from Redditor, this is a throwaway 0915, who shared that her grandmother is her mom, not by birth, but like emotionally and support wise, she adopted her. Apparently the girl's birth mom married a very problematic guy that used to molest her till she was 5 or 6 years old. The user confided in her best friend about it, who told her own parents, who informed her school. Now instead of confronting the husband and divorcing him like anyone would, the birth mom went to the police and claimed the user was lying and threw her in the foster system just so no charges were placed against the guy. Like, what the hell? Why would a 5-year-old lie about that? 5-year-olds don't know what molestation is, there's no reason for them to know what it is unless they're going through it. The birth mom even put a restraining order on this young ass kid, so it's just so messed up. Thankfully the girl's grandma adopted her, but it was still really hard going through school and them calling her mum on file who did not give a flying about her. And she couldn't have just been like, oh no, my mum is actually my grandma. She didn't want to explain the whole thing, which I mean obviously who would, it's very traumatic. Now at number 2 is the Black Widow, the dark side of elderly people. So this one was shared by Redditor Philly Cheese, who said there was a rumor in her family that her great grandma was a Black Widow. And that essentially means a female that kills a male after his job is done, like the actual spider, hence the same name. Anyway, the great grandma had 4 husbands and each one died in bizarre mysterious ways. One of them was stabbed to death by the great-grandma's brother because apparently the husband was attacking the great-grandma and her brother walked in on it and stabbed him to death in self-defense. No charges were ever pressed, and so the murder or the self-defense went unconcluded. Then the user's grandma, aka the great-grandma's daughter, completely cut her off and stopped speaking to her mum in 1950 when she was 18. Even when she died in 2014, they never spoke, and I mean that's a long ass time to not speak to your mum, and who even does that unless something serious and horrific happened to prompt it? Thing is, the user got close to her great-grandma for the last 10 years of her life before she died, and she was genuinely the sweetest person ever. But she did say at times when she got angry, the user would see this morbid evil in her face and eyes that made her think the rumors were true and that she did in fact kill her husbands. I've never seen a grandma gone bad. But also no one ever suspects like an old person to be committing a crime. They're like, oh, you go net now. And finally, at number 1 is the toxic relationship. This one broke my heart and I was so disturbed by it, I still don't really know how to feel about it, and I've had like 2 hours to sit on it. Shared by Reddit user Rio_speed_dealer, they said their parents were royally messed up. When their dad came back from serving in Vietnam, he became a heavy heroin user as well as an alcoholic. Either way, he met the user's mom soon after, and after a whirlwind romance filled with alcohol and heroin, they got married. Sounds like the perfect love story. Where can I sign up? No, I'm kidding. Can you imagine? Either way, he introduced the mom to heroin, but she wasn't as heavy a user as he was. As you can imagine, the couple fought a lot. One day when the user was 10 months old, the parents were arguing in the garage, and to prove a point to his wife, the dad picked up the user as a baby and threw them headfirst onto the concrete floor. Their skull was not only fractured, a bit of it actually broke away, revealing some brain. The mom got so mad she hit him with a shovel, and then the dad went to his car, got his gun, shot the mum in the face, and then shot himself in the head. The user was lucky to be alive, but thankfully they didn't become a vegetable or suffer from any brain damage. Their aunt and uncle adopted them and gave them a wonderful life afterwards, but can you imagine that? I feel like any story that involves a baby just really breaks my heart. Like I really can't deal with it because I feel like they're so defenseless and it takes a real monster to hurt a baby. Starting us off at number 10 are the 2 families. This one was shared by Redditor Jerk40 and it's just shocking and scandalous. I was like, god damn, how do you get away with that? He shared that his great-granddad had 2 separate families that lived at 200 yards apart from each other for 20 whole years, and none of them even knew about the other one at all. They only found out at the guy's funeral because the priest asked the spouse to step forward, and both wives did. And I'm sure you can imagine the show that happened after that. I would be so pissed if I was one of the wives. Like, how dare you take that secret to the grave with you? I don't want to know why he hid it, why did he feel the need to marry someone else? Oh, the audacity to have them live on the same street as well. Like, I'm so pissed on these women's behalves. Like, you can't. Moving on. It's not my battle. It's not my battle. Coming in at number 9 is the Eye. Now this one was shared by a now deleted Reddit user who shared the story about her parents. When she was about 5 years old, her mum decided she no longer wanted to be with her dad anymore, and so she told him. Her dad, having major anger management issues, got really angry and they started having a fight. Her dad grabbed the mum because he was about to hit her, but the user's 7-year-old sister intervened and tried to pull him off her. But as she got close, the dad swung backwards and hit her in the eye with the TV remote and blinded her there and then. The parents ended up telling her that she fell and that's how it happened, and the sister herself was too traumatized to know what happened or even remember it, but the user did remember. The sister got bullied incessantly throughout school and ended up dropping out in 10th grade because of it. Got into drugs and alcoholism all because of this one accident she doesn't even know the truth about. The cherry on top, the sister is extremely close to the dad and she has no idea. I would tell her, what the hell, rip the band-aid right off, tell her. At number 8 we have drugs. Now this was shared by an anonymous person who said her mum is Colombian but moved to the US when she was 12. She had no idea who her family was, but was told many stories over the years from different relatives. The person was also aware that her Italian paternal grandparents had ties to the mob, and through many Google searches she found out that her granddad was actually a snitch and was put into the witness protection program after being implicated in murder. And for being a huge coke dealer. Cause you know, if you're already killing people, what's a bit of drug dealing on the side? It's really not that deep. Curious, the person started researching her maternal side and found out that her other grandparents were leaders of a huge pot smuggling ring in Colombia in the 80s. They were both sentenced to over 250 years in jail each, and after that her trail of Google searches went cold. Rumor has it her maternal granddad died of a heart attack in jail after hearing that his wife had been murdered. So on one side her maternal grandparents were prolific pot smugglers, and on the other Italian paternal side they were murderers and coke dealers. Hopefully the apple fell very far from the tree. Filling our number 7 slot is the revelation. I'd be so mad if I was this boy, I swear down. Shared by an anonymous person as well. He said his parents always just joke around about how they picked up the wrong baby at the hospital. I feel like every kid does this and does it to their siblings. My sisters used to tell me I was adopted the whole time I was growing up. Well, at 17 years old he found out it wasn't as much of a joke as they made it out to be. His parents revealed that around the exact same time he was born, another baby boy had been abandoned by his parents and both kids were the same size. Mix-ups are never meant to happen, but somehow it did, and essentially the staff didn't know which one was the actual son of the user's parents. His mum looked at the babies and swore that he was her kid despite the name tag saying otherwise, and that was that. Genetic tests were super expensive back in the day, so they couldn't do it, and now the user isn't even sure if he's his parents' biological son or not. And he doesn't really care to find out, but he does wonder about the other baby and if he was ever adopted or if he was the real biological son or not. I would so take a test. I'd love to know. Actually, I don't know, that could really break me. That revelation that late in life, I don't know if I could handle that. Now at number 6 is Soul. This one was shared by an anonymous person who said that their grandma was the one that knew all the dirty little secrets about the family. She was like the guardian of the galaxy of secrets, should I say? But are my jokes getting worse with every video? I feel like they are. Please tell me in the comments below. Actually no, don't, because I don't want to cry myself to sleep, so just don't do that, thanks. Anyway, aside from my bad joke, one night the grandma was sharing details about her husband's family and how they were very poor growing up. They would live off the streets and were really struggling to make money during Australia's gold rush, so they came up with a very questionable solution. They had a lot of kids but not enough money to support all of them, so they just up and sold one of their kids. Like, that kid would have been the person's grandfather's granduncle had he not been sold off, and the grandma had kept it a secret her entire life. How do you even choose which kid to sell? Like, oh, that one's been pissing me off, let's just sell that one. Or that one eats too much, he's just not financially viable, let's just get rid of that one. Like, how can a mum or a dad choose which kid to sell? I can't even fathom that. It's like, oh Boris, you don't want to do your chores? I'll sell you. I sold Patrick, I'll sell you too. That's exactly what they would have done. Coming in at number 5 is the pedophile, shared by another anonymous person because clearly no one wants to be linked to the dirty secrets they reveal. This person shared that their wife's brother-in-law is a pedophile and had gone to jail for it. He was released after treatment and rehab, and one day when she really had to get groceries, she left her 12 and 4-year-old daughters with this man. Of course he tries to assault the 12-year-old, and when the mum comes back she realizes what a mistake she's made. She then realizes, wait, this 12-year-old cannot tell the police because then social services would just take her kids away for being frickin' incompetent. Which, I mean, they're not wrong. Who the hell leaves their kid with an ex-convicted pedophile? It's literally not rocket science. So the mum convinces the 12-year-old to forget about it, the man faces no consequences, and they just never talk about it again. The pedophile still attends all the family dinners, and every time the 12-year-old girl sees him, mind you she's like 25 now, she has a proper panic attack every time. At number 4 is Drug Money, shared by Maddie Bell on Reddit. She said that one of her dad's cousins murdered his mum, which would have been the user's grandpa's sister. Apparently the mum wouldn't give her son drug money, so he just snapped and stabbed her to death and then chopped up her body. That tore the whole family apart, which was a huge deal since it was a very tight-knit family beforehand. No one talked about him or the incident after that, and he just recently got out of jail and reached out to the family, which was just very awkward to put it lightly. No one talks to him, no one even acknowledges he exists, but her dad did meet him 3 months ago, but just hasn't told the family about it. I guess we're just adding more skeletons into the closet, I guess. You know what I mean? Why come out of the hole you've dug yourself into when you can just dig it deeper? Maybe it'll just become so deep no one can even see you. Filling our number 3 slot is the secret brother. Now this one was shared by an anonymous person who said it took her dad 17 years to admit that he had fathered another kid before she was born. He had had a kid with someone that wasn't her mom, and every single person in her family knew about it other than her. Her estranged brother was raised by his mom alone, and her dad didn't even meet him till he was 13 years old. The user's parents had come to an agreement that if he had nothing to do with the other woman or the son, that they could make their marriage work. It was kept so under wraps to the point that when she visited her grandparents, they would hide pictures of her brother so she'd never find out. And I mean, it worked, but when she did find out, she went through this depressive, guilty phase about being the kid that her dad chose rather than her brother. I'd be so pissed off. If I was an only child, I'd love to have a sibling, and having a sibling and not knowing about it would just annoy me even more. Now at number 2 is the real reason. This one was shared by Reddit user FFSend_513, who said her sister died 3 years ago. She took care of the whole thing and preserved her image and memory by telling their parents she had passed out in the bath and had drowned. But of course, that's not what happened at all. The user actually found her sister slumped forward and dead in the bathtub because she had passed out after shooting up heroin. If I found my sister's dead body like that, I don't think I'd ever get over it. Like, they're my best friends in the whole world. I don't even know how I'd go on, so my heart literally breaks for this user that she had to go through this. Like that, I don't even know. And finally, at number 1 is abandonment. This one broke my heart and was shared by possum_alert on Reddit. They said that their great-grand aunt had a son out of wedlock with a man who was already married to someone else. A few years later, she got married herself, but her husband refused to take care of and raise another man's child, and so he refused to let the child even live in his house. How cruel is that? Like, it wasn't the kid's fault. So the couple drove somewhere in the middle of the night and just abandoned this 3 or 4-year-old kid on the side of the road and just drove off. Honestly, like, at first this story didn't hit me as hard as it did after I really thought about it. Like, imagine this poor little boy who literally doesn't even know how to fend for himself being left on the road in the middle of the night. Like, how long did he wait for his parents to come back and get him? Did he make it even, or did he die? Was he just going around saying, I don't know where my parents went? Like, this actually broke my heart. Like, and why at night? Night is so dangerous. Like, why? Oh, like, I'm really sad for this kid, and I hope you're doing so well wherever you are.